Welcome, friends, to a very, very special bonus episode of the 1 Minute Scripture Study podcast. Callie and I are here today with Kay West, who you might know from a worldwide sisterhood. And we're so excited to share this episode. We are going to be talking to her about diversity, about inclusivity in the church, about a lot of these topics. And this is a special topic for June, because as many of you know, June 1978 was when the priesthood was finally made available to all male members of the church. So Kay, welcome. And with that, would you be willing to just share your story, introduce yourself and share like who you are, the work you do, and why you feel called to do it?
Sure. So first of all, I need to say that I'm big fans of yours, both of you. Well, what did you guys say with Sister Dalton? Spiritual fans. I'm a spiritual fan of you both. Just love you both and everything you do. So honored to be here. But my story. So I am the founder of a worldwide sisterhood. My parents immigrated from Japan over 50 years ago. And they raised my four sisters and I in Canada. And so the reason I started a worldwide sisterhood is really because growing up, we didn't have family. You know, it was my parents and my sisters. And we were Asian in a predominantly Caucasian community and ward. And my parents went through a lot of trials, a lot of trials. And in Japan, our lineage, our family history is called a koseki. And in order to obtain one, I would have to go to my parents' birth villages or towns or cities. I would have to go to the city hall. I would have to prove my lineage in far enough back that they can prove that it's me. And then I would have to provide a good reason to obtain a koseki. And unfortunately, family history isn't one of those. And so growing up, I was kind of lost because, you know, everybody talks about your past and you're connected to these people and they shape you and help you. And I didn't have any of that. You know, I met my maternal grandmother once when I was 16. I met my mom's brother once. You know, I met one of my dad's brothers and one of his sisters once, and they both come from large families. So it was hard to figure out who I was, especially when you're faced with like racism on top of it in your community and even in your ward. But what I learned is my parents' faithful examples and their Christ-like attitude towards everyone really taught me as they just served and were so faithful in their testimonies as new converts to the church, new immigrants. They really, really showed me that I was part of a family, and it was a worldwide family. And my mom saw a need, and the need was she was an immigrant. She knew how hard it was. And so they both worked really hard and learned the language and learned the culture. My dad started his own business consulting company, but my mom founded the largest English as a second language school for new immigrants and refugees in Western Canada. It's the largest private owned one for over 30 years and has helped thousands and thousands of students from literally around the world. You know, like you name a country, a place around the world, and they've had students from there. And she saw the need. She saw that people needed to belong. And when you come to something new, you need to belong. And so I'm a huge advocate for women everywhere who belong to this worldwide sisterhood. Women who truly lift and love and shine the light of Christ. I'm passionate about it. You know, he is my heartbeat. And so I love a worldwide sisterhood. And so that is why I am doing what I'm doing.
Well, what a passionate story. Oh, I love that. That is really cool. And I love that each of our backgrounds kind of inform what I feel like is our purpose. Like that was a perfectly led purpose that you've discovered. You mentioned that you kind of had some hard times experiencing racism, even, you know, within your community that was mostly Caucasian, but also in the church. And I, first of all, just want to thank you so much for being willing to talk about these, because I know that these are personal questions that we do not, you don't owe us answers or responses to these, but I'm wondering if you would be able and willing to share a few experiences, what you maybe went through, especially for those who feel like this can't exist in the church, or we don't really have this. If you wouldn't mind, what are some things that you have had to or dealt with in the past?
Sure. So I think, first of all, the biggest thing for me is that, especially within the LDS community, my color of racism doesn't matter. Like, there's all this LDS art of, you know, my beautiful Black sisters, and even my beautiful Latinx sisters, you know, but show me some artwork with some Asians in it. It is so hard. And when they share their experiences of racism, it's recognized. And if I ever share, it is silence. I think the first thing is that my racism, because of my color, doesn't matter in the LDS community. And it doesn't seem to matter a whole lot in the rest of the world, especially if we look at the current climate in the United States, the acts against Asians. And the thing is, that's been going on for, you know, the history of the world, right? It's not a new thing. But I have watched at a very young age my parents shaking hands with people, you know, and some people refused to. Some people would walk past them and ignore them, and then, you know, out in the hall talk about them. Like, one person actually came up to me and said, laughed that my mom had shared how, you know, she only has a simple outfit that she wears in the summer to church and one in the winter to church. And, you know, she doesn't really care about clothing and stuff. And they laughed. They thought it was so ridiculous, not understanding that for her, that was a luxury, you know, coming from nothing. It was a luxury. And sorry, I've talked about this enough. I'm really okay. But and I realized that if I could hear them, that my parents could hear them. But they, you know, when Christ preaches to turn the other cheek, they lived it. Like, they were the perfect examples to me of turning the other cheek. And so I, even in the temple, I saw people, you know, walk past them and not notice them when they would, you know, put their hands out. And it's funny because the first time my husband, who he is Caucasian, the first time he experienced it, we were newlywed and we were in a ward and our stake high councilman was speaking, and he spent 40 minutes telling the whole ward how much he hated, not disliked, but hated Japanese people because of his experiences in the war. And because of all my experiences growing up and the people I surrounded myself with, and just honestly my parents' example, I sat there and my husband kept turning to me. He was mad, you know, let's go. Don't you want to leave? Let's leave. And I thought I could actually see him as a child of God, because my parents had been through war. You know, my dad literally had to raise himself on his own from the age of 14, you know? And I think that I have a really different approach when it comes to racism and talking about racism than a lot of people. I have been spit upon, I've been sworn at, our house has been robbed, I don't even, countless times growing up. We've been, you know, my parents have been yelled at, screamed at in public, even just when I was a little girl. By their side, they've, you know, we've been through it all. And growing up, I was the only one of two Asians. The other one was a boy. In my elementary school and junior high school, there was one more girl who was Asian. But we got to high school, and finally, here was my people. And it was, we were, we, we called ourselves by our color because we were literally the black, brown, yellow, red, and a few whites. And we were literally just with each other, and they weren't members, but I didn't care because none of the members wanted to know me, you know? And so, you know, my parents were poor. They worked so hard, and I wasn't one of the daughters from the white families, you know, in the stake, who were doctors and lawyers and things like that. And so it was difficult. It was really difficult. It was really hard. But honestly, because my parents' examples were so Christ-like and their faith and testimony in Christ was so sure, I literally built my foundation on that, especially when it comes to racism. And even now, all of my black, brown, red friends, you know, they tell me, you know, I've never even been through that. Like, I've thought about it. Sometimes I get scared, but I've never actually lived with that experience. Like, they've never even had a racist experience towards them personally. But yet, you know, they can talk about it, but until you experience it, it does change you. And you have to think, are you going to let it change you and anger you, or are you going to literally, you know, be a peacemaker and learn how to love them as Christ does? Because regardless of what they do to us, Heavenly Father loves them all equally. And so there's got to be some sort of common ground for us all and a way to love.
I'm furious on your behalf right now. Like, just listening to you say those things, like I feel so much pain for your parents and for you, because how unfair, like, especially you mentioned in the temple, people acting that way toward them. And so I thank you, honestly, like Callie mentioned, like, it is not your job to educate people who haven't experienced racism about what it's like. That's not your job. And so thank you for sharing what is a really hard story to share. I thank you for that. And I wasn't planning on asking this because it just came to my mind as you were talking about. I grew up where in elementary school, I had one white friend. Where I lived, it was predominantly Asian and Latino and African American. And so I have no memories of ever seeing anyone be racist towards anyone else, because that was our normal. And so I guess my question is for you. I can't understand what it's like to go through what you have gone through, because obviously I'm very white, and in our country, for whatever reason, that seems to be a group that does not experience racism. And so this is a hard question, but can you explain? And again, you're not obligated to. If this is like, nope, I don't want to educate you on that today. But can you explain to someone who has never experienced it and never has felt it or seen it, what is the emotion that would go through you when you would experience that, when someone would, you know, inadvertently, like they didn't intend to offend you, but they did, or watching your parents go through that? Obviously there was anger, but I can't even relate. So can you explain it in a way that maybe I can better empathize, because I currently can't?
I think that's a good question, because how can you explain to somebody, like, both of my children are adopted from birth. You can't explain to me what childbirth feels like, right? Because I've never experienced it. The closest, I mean, your mothers, but if you weren't mothers, your siblings or your parents, if someone were to, let's take a look at, like, bullying. it is a form of bullying, really. If somebody is going to come up to your child and just start attacking them for no reason, the mama bear in you would come out, right? It really is that feeling. Like, I was probably about 8 years old the first time I recognized it for what it was. And I was so mad. I couldn't understand how my mom could just so calmly walk out with my hand, taking me by the hand and lead me out of that store. I couldn't understand it. It made me so angry. And I think that as I've grown up and learned, there are two kinds of ignorance. There are the people who literally are unaware, you know, and can you blame someone for really being unaware? My daughter has multiple physical and mental special needs, but to look at her, you can't actually see the physical special needs as easily until she starts speaking. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, she's got special needs. And so there's that kind of ignorance, but then there's also the one where people actively choose not to know. And I think that's the one that is difficult, because emotion gets tied up in things. And when people get emotional, it can drown out common sense. It can also drown out the spirit in a lot of things. People who hear my experiences, who are people of color, who are of the same faith as me, they say, oh, no, you can't ignore that. You have to share that. You have to hold on to it and feel those emotions. And I thought, but then I'm not happy and I'm not forgiving. And what is that doing to me and my spirit and my soul? So I think when it comes to opportunities or to those feelings, I think the best I can explain it as is, if take the person you love the most, and just last week, a young Asian father was pushing his baby stroller down the street, and out of nowhere, a man came and started beating him up in broad daylight in front of a store, and then took off and just left him. And the first thing he did was jump up and check on the baby. So that's what it feels like.
Thank you for explaining that. And I have to apologize if that was uncomfortable. And to anyone listening, I just have to say, Callie and I are doing our best to approach this in a way that will not offend anyone and that will open dialogue. But if we do offend, please know that's not our intention. And Kay, I thank you so much for being so understanding, because I'm sure I have said things in the wrong way. And I just want everyone to know the point of this episode is not just to hear horrible stories from Kay and pull these things out. The point is that there's got to be something we can do about it, right? And we're hoping that Kay can help everyone, our worldwide sisterhood, to understand better what we as individuals can do. And we're going to get to that. But thank you, Kay, for all of that. And then Callie had a question for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of going off of that is, I recently have just felt this huge power of listening to everyone's story, because your story is not the same as someone else's, which is not the same as someone else's. And like, that's the way that we gain empathy. And that's the way that we learn how to become more Christ-like, instead of saying, I haven't experienced that, so I don't know what that is. Instead, it's, tell me about it. What have you been experiencing? I want to know what you know. I want to feel what you have felt. And so I'm curious what lessons you've learned, because you now have a worldwide sisterhood that you're running. What have you then learned from listening to other people's stories, just the individual person telling what they've experienced?
So honestly, sometimes it breaks my heart. I mean, how can it not? I think when somebody is mistreated, and don't get me wrong, like, you get me on a week of no sleep and like a 2-year-old diet, and I'm not a very nice person to be around, like, I can react, but I think what I'm good at is I'm quick to ask for forgiveness, because I know I'm in the wrong. And I think when people are are willing to try, we need to be willing, like everyone, to be forgiving and accepting. And again, it comes back to that ignorance. There are two kinds. When people are literally unaware, like when people are literally unaware that my daughter has all these special needs, and they approach her and start talking to her like she's a regular 16, 17-year-old girl, you know, do I get mad at them? No, I, how can I justify getting mad at someone who really doesn't know and who's trying? Versus, you know, if somebody, again, the flip side, if somebody chooses to not know, I I also can't hold them accountable for that, because like I can't be angry at them for that, because really that becomes their choice, and I'm not responsible for other people's choices. I'm only responsible for my own. And I think, again, with these emotional topics, it's too easy to cloud. I think we confuse agreeing with everything everyone says as a support or love, and it's not. Um, I learned this growing up at my mom's school, because there are students from around the world, literally. You know, I have not just a church worldwide family, but I have, you know, thousands of students and their families from around the world who call my parents aunt, uncle, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa. My latest nephew, who, thanks to COVID, I haven't met yet, is a refugee from Haiti. And he's my newest nephew. He's, you know, he's in his 20s, but he's still my newest nephew, and loves his grandma and grandpa so much. But I grew up watching these students who, for centuries, their countries have been at war. They were born and raised to hate one another. I've watched them, I've talked with them, I've sat with them, I've broken bread with them, and I've watched them love one another in my parents' school. I've watched them, my parents made us work. We're Japanese. My parents made us work. But it was go to the school, set up these cultural nights, cultural events. All the students bring potlucks. They talk about their countries and traditions and their family gatherings and what they want for their future. And these students, who've literally been at war for generations, would sit down and share a table together and talk with one another and reach out to one another and support one another. And I just think that that was the best lesson for me, because it does break my heart, but it shows me what we are capable of when we make the choice ourselves. So people who choose to stay ignorant, I can't let it affect me, because it is their choice. I can only let my own choice affect me.
That
I
is
hope that
so,
answered the question.
no, that's so powerful. That's so powerful. And I loved how you talked about that inclusivity, because I think a lot of people don't see the need for it, right? We're so comfortable with the people who are the same as us. And my family just moved to Idaho, and everyone loves to just hang out with their own family instead of like branching out. And there's so much power and so many gifts in inclusivity. So I love that you said that. And I want to ask you, one of the things I worry about as we're talking about this, and it's kind of like a hot topic, right? People are talking about this. It's in the news. And one of my real worries about this is, like, this is important, like inclusivity and diversity, like these are things that are important. So how do you feel like, and I don't know, this is a huge question. Like, let me put the weight of the world on your shoulders right now. Okay, figure it out for everyone. But how do you feel like we can avoid turning this into a trend or a passing hashtag, you know, that, oh, okay, so I listened to this podcast episode and that was interesting, and then I don't think about it again. What do you think we can do to actually make this a part of who we are, this inclusivity and this diversity thing?
So I think, first of all, with inclusivity, like we can define and put labels on it, but what it really boils down to is, and it doesn't matter even about the color. It's the group of participants, regardless of differences, each of them has to feel welcome, heard, valued, validated, accepted, and loved. I think we confuse inclusivity with everyone's on the same page, and that's not the case. Some of my dearest friends are women of other faith, and we can get together and we can hear and value one another's beliefs and opinions, even though we don't agree with everything. That is more of inclusivity to me. And I think that any marginalized group should be able to feel this inclusivity, right? And so I think one thing is this topic specifically with racism and race, it's hard because you have to take a real good look at yourself and ask, if my circle only includes these people, if I only sit with these people at church, if I'm only interacting with the same people, why? And why am I not choosing to meet that person or talk to this person or reach out to this person or sit by that person who's all alone? So that's one, but I also think that unity and diversity are not mutually exclusive. You know, like if everyone were the same, you're not united, you're just the same, you know. That's not unity either. If we look at leadership within our own church, if President Nelson, if his counselors and the Quorum of the 12, if they were all President Nelson, he would just be surrounded by yes men. Does that make him a strong leader? No. No. You know, but if he is surrounded by all these men of different backgrounds, you know, even different thoughts and different ideas and different inspiration, and collectively they come together, they have that mutual respect, they have that sharing of different opinions and even different revelations that they've received, and that makes them stronger. And that is what we have to work on in our daily lives. All these hot button topics, they're always going to be in the news, and whether or not they're in the news for 24 hours or 24 years, they're always going to be in the news. And the only way is honestly work. One of my favorite, I don't know what to call him, activists, Ibram X. Kendi, he is somebody who shares that, you know, no one, no race, no ethnicity, no culture, no heritage, no one is excluded from feelings of racism. Everybody has tendencies to be racist. And he says it takes work. We know how to be racist, we know how to not be racist, but we have to actively be anti-racist, and it takes work, so much work. And honestly, it begins in your home, on your daily life, what you choose to do that day. There's a lot of topics that I'm not educated on, and I want to be, but it takes work, and I need to put in that effort in order to make sure that I am educating myself and not letting things be a passing trend. But I also think when it becomes these hot topics, we have to be careful that the loudest voice isn't necessarily the right voice. You know, just because you share the same beliefs, you're the same faith, or even same color, that does not mean that just because their voice is loud, that it's correct. You know, the gospel is plain. You know, it's so plain and precious. And Kelly, I think you talked about this in your on your Monday thing, but it's so plain so that there can be no confusion. And I think if you're listening to somebody, again, even if you have 90% you agree with this person, that 10%, if it's not eating, like not sitting right with you, it might not be correct. I don't think my job is to educate every white person on earth. I feel like my job is to love every person on earth regardless, and know that if I expect perfection from them when it comes to racism, then man, they're going to expect it from me. You know, isn't that what Joseph Smith said? If they expect perfection from me, then I'm going to expect it from them. And wow, like, do we really expect that from one another? Do we really not have it within us to give a little bit, to be a little bit understanding, especially if people are trying? So I think it takes work. It takes, you know, you don't have to apologize to me. I know that you're trying and nothing has been offensive for me. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate being able to share just a slightly different point of view than really what is mostly heard out there. I love everybody who shares. I appreciate and I can see where they're coming from. But I also can see my experiences and what I know my Savior would want me to do. And so if that means you really want to try and learn more about being actively anti-racist, you know, then it comes down to the work. And the work is in your home.
Yeah, I think, first of all, your Christ-like heart, Kay, just is shining through. Like, to have to forgive that much, it takes a really soft heart. And obviously I see that in the scriptures everywhere. The Lord wants us to have a soft heart, and he warns us again and again about hardening our hearts. Like, that is one of the biggest warnings, especially in the Doctrine and Covenants this year. It's just constantly about warning against hardening our hearts. And what a beautiful job you've done with that. I know when you said, like, we have to really examine ourselves. We have to examine on what our tendencies are when we walk into church and there's new people and there's a Hispanic family and there's a white family. And which one are you going to talk to? And sometimes that is a really hard realization to come to of, oh, I'm usually drawn towards the people who look like myself. How can I make my ward or my neighborhood a more welcoming place to people who don't look like me? Because obviously I don't believe the same thing as every other Caucasian person in my ward. Like, none of us should be judged just by what we look like. And yet we sometimes still look at people and put them in this little box of, oh yes, well, I know probably what they're like. And we're all individuals. We all have our own stories. And I don't know, I've just really been touched by the softness of the message that you're sharing today. I am a very practical person, so I know you shared a few things about examining our hearts, but where can we start? Where can a Latter-day woman start? And maybe, I don't know if you have any resources that you produce or would recommend, but how can we work on creating, just one step at a time, a worldwide sisterhood where we live?
I think the best place to start is to shut our mouths sometimes. Sorry. I think it is, I think if we really want to get to that place, we need to be a better listener than we are teacher, educator. You know, we often take it upon ourselves to solve other people's problems when all they need is a validation. So I think the biggest thing is to just listen, like really listen, not just like really hear people. I heard, I saw somebody post last week, just because she carries it well, she's still carrying a burden, you know, and everybody does in their own way. And for some people, they might look at the burden and think, oh, that's nothing. You know, I've been through way worse. But other people might look at it and think, whoa, that is crazy. How is she doing it? So I think we need to be really, really careful. And when we and I think also we need to turn off our emotions, because it is so hard. It is so hard to teach, love, accept, when we're driven by this emotion. Like I could easily go back to, being a 14-year-old girl on the street with this white woman spitting on me and screaming at me, and feel those things. But if I turn off the emotion and I remember that, wait, she's a child of God too, and how I treat her is just as important as how she treats me, I think that those are two great places to start. And really, and then really looking around and seeing. And maybe it's not a person of color, because where we live, there really aren't a lot. Really, but if somebody is sharing whatever it is, maybe it's an elderly person, maybe it's somebody with special needs, maybe it's somebody sharing about mental health, those are all great places to start, because it's all the same emotions, it's all the same feelings, and it's all the same desire to be accepted, included, unified, and one with someone. So I think, listen, shut off your emotions, and look for the nearest person you can start with.
That is so wonderful. And I have to say, as a follow-up to everything that you've shared today, I said near the beginning that because of where I lived, I hadn't seen racism. And listening to you and realizing, oh, I need to question myself. Like I need to really think. As I've thought back, I'm like, no, wait, I did. I remember there was a name for the Asian boys in my high school who drove certain cars, and that's a form of racism. And actually, my teachers did treat those African-American boys a little bit differently. And so I think that is such a great place to start too, and that you invited us to, is start thinking and checking in with yourself. Like, based on my history, do I have assumptions about people? And is that, that doesn't mean I'm going out and saying things or doing things to people, but do I make assumptions about people based on what they look like? So thank you for teaching me today and helping me see that I might need to check myself and some assumptions I make about people. So thank you for that. As we close, this has been marvelous. And Callie and I both so appreciate your willingness to share. But we would love to end, as we do with everyone we interview, by asking you, how do you #hear him?
So if I'm being really honest, recently, how I've been hearing him has been being woken up at 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the morning. And it's the worst. It's the worst, best thing, right? But it's kind of the worst. But I can't even tell you how many scriptures, how many things have come to my mind at 2 or 3 in the morning. But I think, on a more reasonable note, I think it's, honestly, I've been trying to look at every little moment where he answers my prayers as a miracle. And because I think we always say miracles are big things, but they're not. It's like every little thing is a miracle. Like just before this podcast, as I was praying and studying, the thing that I was asking for was literally in the scripture that I read. And it was like, you've already been given this. And it was a reminder. And so I think how I hear him is I try to be more aware just on every little thing that happens in my day. And when it happens, I record it so that I hear him more. Even at 2, 3 in the morning, I hear him more. But I do hear him more. And so that's how I hear him.
It's so beautiful. And I guess God doesn't really work on a particular timetable, right? Time doesn't exist there. So he's like, 2:30 is a great time. She's not doing anything else. Oh, Kay, you are just, there are very few people in this world that I call this, but you are lovely. Like, you really are just a lovely person. You've shared so much light and helped us understand this topic in a way that brings Christ into it. And we so appreciate that. We really do. Where can people find you? Everyone's going to want to find you. So where can everyone find you as soon as they turn this podcast off?
So I am on Instagram at A Worldwide Sisterhood, and my website, aworldwidesisterhood.com. I'm on Facebook, but I'm the worst Facebooker, like alive. Like, you hit enter, it should go to the next line, and then it posts. And then how do you delete that post? I mean, I don't know.
Yes.
So if you want proper paragraphs, find me on Instagram.
I am right there with you. Awesome. Okay, well, we will put that in the show notes where you can contact Kay. But again, thank you, Kay, so much. And thank you, everyone, for being here today and for coming closer to Christ with us a few minutes at a time.